You walk through a museum and see ancient pottery behind glass. Stone tools. Primitive carvings. They tell you this is what our ancestors were capable of. Simple people with simple knowledge. But what if I told you that's a lie? Not the pottery itself. The story around it. The narrative that says humanity crawled forward in a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment. Because there's something they don't show you in that museum. The empty pedestals. The gaps in the timeline. The technologies that existed once and then vanished completely, as if they were never real at all. 3 libraries burned. You know the names if you paid attention in school. Alexandria. Nalanda. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad. They teach you these were tragedies, losses of knowledge, unfortunate accidents of history. What they don't teach you is the pattern. These weren't random fires scattered across time. They happened within 200 years of each other, across 3 continents, during periods of massive political upheaval. And when the smoke cleared, entire fields of human knowledge had simply ceased to exist. Technologies that had worked for centuries suddenly became impossible. Formulas that had been refined over generations turned into mysteries. The ancients knew things, you see. Things we're only now rediscovering. And when those libraries burned, we lost the instruction manuals. This isn't about conspiracy. This is about what happens when knowledge is concentrated in one place and that place is destroyed. Whether by accident or design. Whether through religious conquest or political calculation or simple human stupidity. The result is the same. A darkness that lasted centuries. Technologies that had to be reinvented from scratch, or that we still haven't figured out today. You've been taught that progress moves forward. Always forward. But history tells a different story. History shows us that humanity has lost the knowledge of how to do things at least 3 times. Maybe more. And each time, we had to start over, fumbling in the dark, trying to remember what our ancestors knew. They wanted you to forget. Or maybe they just wanted you to never learn in the first place. Because if you knew what was lost, you'd start asking uncomfortable questions. Like why it was lost. And who benefited from that loss. Let me take you back to the year 48 BC. Julius Caesar is in Egypt, caught in a civil war between Cleopatra and her brother. His ships are trapped in the harbor of Alexandria. He needs a tactical advantage, something dramatic. So he orders his men to set fire to the Egyptian fleet. The flames spread. They always do. And they reach the warehouses along the waterfront. Inside those warehouses are scrolls. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some say 700,000. Others claim it was less, that the great library itself wasn't touched, that only a smaller collection burned. But here's what nobody disputes. Knowledge was destroyed that day. Irreplaceable knowledge. And once it was gone, it stayed gone. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building full of books. It was the brain of the ancient world. Every ship that docked in the harbor was searched. If you had scrolls, they were confiscated, copied, and the copies were returned to you. Maybe. The originals stayed in Alexandria. Scholars came from every corner of the known world to study there. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth there, getting within 50 miles of the actual measurement using nothing but shadows and geometry. Euclid wrote his Elements there, the textbook that would define mathematics for 2,000 years. Aristarchus proposed that the earth revolves around the sun, 1,700 years before Copernicus. And Hero of Alexandria, he created something that would change your understanding of what the ancients were capable of. Hero built the first steam engine. Not a toy. Not a curiosity. A functioning steam engine called an eolipile. A sphere mounted on an axle with 2 bent tubes protruding from it. Fill it with water, heat it, and steam shoots out of the tubes, causing the sphere to spin. Basic thermodynamics. The same principle that would power the Industrial Revolution 1800 years later. Except in Hero's time, it went nowhere. No factories. No locomotives. No transformation of society. Because the knowledge of what to do with it, how to scale it, how to apply it to practical problems, that knowledge was scattered across scrolls in the library. Scrolls that would soon burn. And when they burned, the technology became a curiosity again. A party trick mentioned in passing by later writers who didn't understand what they were describing. You have to understand what this means. Humanity had the steam engine in the 1st century AD. We had the principle of steam power worked out, demonstrated, recorded. And then we lost it. For 18 centuries, that knowledge simply didn't exist in any meaningful way. Think about what could have been different. Think about the trajectory of human civilization if steam power had been developed and refined starting in 100 AD instead of 1700 AD. The empires that might have risen. The technologies that might have followed, passed down from father to son, guarded as the empire's most precious treasure. And then the family line ended, and the secret died with them. By the 13th century, Greek fire had become a legend. Modern chemists have tried to recreate it. The closest they've come is a mixture of crude oil, sulfur, and quicklime. But the descriptions don't quite match. The behavior isn't right. Something's missing. Some ingredient or technique that was written down somewhere, probably in Alexandria, probably lost in one of those fires. Here's what's even more disturbing. The Byzantines didn't invent Greek fire. They inherited it. References to incendiary weapons appear in much earlier texts. Thucydides mentions something similar used in the Peloponnesian War in 424 BC. The Chinese had their own versions. Multiple ancient civilizations independently developed liquid fire weapons, which means the knowledge was widespread enough that losing one source shouldn't have mattered. But it did matter. Because when the libraries burned, we didn't just lose one formula. We lost the entire chemical knowledge base that made understanding that formula possible. We lost the context, the framework, the foundational texts that explained the principles behind the practical applications. They wanted you to forget. Or maybe knowledge is just more fragile than we want to admit. Let me tell you about Roman concrete. You've seen the Pantheon if you've been to Rome. That massive dome, still standing after 2,000 years, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Or the Pont du Gard aqueduct in France, carrying water across a valley using nothing but gravity and engineering precision that modern architects struggle to match. Roman concrete was better than modern concrete in almost every measurable way. It got stronger over time instead of weaker. It could set underwater. It was more resistant to earthquakes, more durable against the elements, more flexible under stress. And then the Roman Empire fell. And the formula for Roman concrete was lost. For 1,500 years, humanity couldn't figure out how the Romans did it. We knew they used volcanic ash. We knew there was lime involved. But the exact proportions, the mixing technique, the curing process, all of that knowledge vanished. Medieval builders tried to recreate it and failed. Renaissance architects studied Roman ruins and came up short. It wasn't until 2017 that researchers at MIT finally figured it out. The secret was in the volcanic ash from Pozzuoli near Naples. Specific minerals in that ash reacted with seawater to create aluminum tobermarite crystals, which grew over time, filling in cracks and making the concrete stronger as it aged. The Romans knew this. They'd worked it out through trial and error and careful observation. And they wrote it down. Vitruvius mentions concrete in his architectural treatise. But the detailed formulas, the practical handbooks that builders actually used, those were in the libraries. Those burned. You have to sit with this for a moment. We lost the formula for concrete that lasts 2,000 years. We spent 15 centuries building things that crumbled while Roman structures stood. Not because we were stupid. Not because we lacked the capability. But because the knowledge had been destroyed and we had to rediscover it from scratch. That's how fragile civilization is. That's how close we always are to forgetting everything we know. Now imagine what else they erased. What else burned that we haven't even realized is missing yet? The House of Wisdom in Baghdad was built in the 8th century during the Islamic Golden Age. It became the intellectual center of the world after Alexandria fell. Scholars translated every text they could find into Arabic, Greek philosophy, Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics. The works that survived Alexandria's destruction ended up here. New discoveries were made. Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra there, giving us the word algorithm from his name. Ibn al-Haytham wrote the Book of Optics, laying the foundation for the scientific method itself. The House of Wisdom was where East met West, where ancient knowledge combined with new insights, where human understanding reached heights it wouldn't reach again for centuries. In 1258, Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan sacked Baghdad. They threw so many books into the Tigris River that the water ran black with ink for 6 months. Survivors said you could walk across the river on the floating pages. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts destroyed in a matter of days. The Mongols were systematic about it. They weren't just conquering a city. They were erasing a culture. And with it, they erased technologies that would have changed the world. One of those technologies was the astrolabe. Well, not the astrolabe itself. That survived. But the sophisticated astronomical calculations that made it truly powerful, those were lost. An astrolabe is a handheld device that models the visible sky. You can use it to tell time, to navigate, to calculate the positions of stars and planets. Islamic astronomers had refined it to incredible precision. They'd mapped the heavens with accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the invention of the telescope. And they'd done it all with mathematics we still barely understand. When Baghdad burned, much of that mathematical framework vanished. We have the devices. We can see them in museums. But the full range of what they could do, the advanced techniques that required years of training to master, much of that is gone. So, ask yourself, what else didn't make it into your history books? What other technologies existed that we've forgotten were even possible? The library of Nalanda in India burned in 1193 when the Turkic general Bakhtiyar Khilji invaded. Nalanda wasn't just a library. It was a university, the first of its kind, founded in the 5th century AD. At its peak, it housed 9 million manuscripts and attracted scholars from as far away as China, Japan, Korea, and Tibet. Medical texts, astronomical treatises, mathematical proofs, philosophical debates spanning centuries. The fire burned for 3 months. That's how much knowledge was there. So much that it took a quarter of a year for it all to turn to ash. Among those texts were medical procedures we're only now beginning to understand. Ancient Indian physicians performed cataract surgery, using a curved needle to push the clouded lens out of the field of vision. They did rhinoplasty, reconstructing noses using skin grafts from the cheek, a technique Europe wouldn't learn until the 16th century when Italian surgeons translated Sanskrit texts that had survived. They used over 1,000 different plants for medicinal purposes, with detailed documentation of dosages, combinations, and side effects. Nalanda was where this knowledge was compiled, refined, and taught. And when it burned, we lost the comprehensive medical encyclopedia of the ancient world. Here's what keeps me up at night. Those medical texts weren't just theoretical. They worked. People were cured. Procedures were successful. Knowledge was passed from teacher to student for centuries. And then one military campaign, one religious conquest, one decision by one general who probably couldn't even read, and it was all gone. How many people died in the centuries after Nalanda burned because a cure existed but the knowledge of it had been destroyed? How much suffering could have been prevented if that library still stood? They wanted you to forget. Or maybe they just never wanted you to know in the first place. Let me tell you about the Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers found a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. Among the artifacts they recovered was a corroded lump of bronze. For decades, nobody paid much attention to it. Then in the 1950s, a researcher named Derek de Solla Price started examining it with X-rays. What he found changed our understanding of ancient technology. The lump was a machine, a sophisticated geared device with at least 30 bronze gears, designed to calculate the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. It could predict eclipses. It tracked the Olympic Games cycle. It was, essentially, an ancient Greek computer built around 100 BC. The precision is what's staggering. The gears are cut with a level of accuracy that shouldn't have been possible with the tools the Greeks supposedly had. The astronomical calculations it performs require knowledge of planetary motion that historians claim the ancients didn't possess. And here's the thing that should terrify you. This wasn't a prototype. This wasn't some genius inventor's one-off creation. The sophistication of the mechanism, the refinement of its design, suggests it was part of an established tradition. There should have been other devices like it. Simpler versions. More complex versions. Instruction manuals. Workshops where they were built. An entire industry of precision engineering that we have no other evidence for. Because that evidence burned. In Alexandria. In Baghdad. In Nalanda. In a dozen other places we don't even know about because the records of their destruction were destroyed too. You have to understand the implications. The Antikythera mechanism proves that ancient civilizations had mechanical computing technology 2,000 years ago. Not primitive. Not crude. Sophisticated. Functional. Reliable enough to use for navigation and astronomical prediction. And we lost it. Completely. It took until the 14th century for European clockmakers to build gears of similar complexity. 1700 years for humanity to relearn what the Greeks knew. That's not progress. That's amnesia. Think about this. What if the libraries hadn't burned? What if that knowledge had been preserved, built upon, refined? What if mechanical computing had continued to develop from 100 BC forward instead of dying out and being reinvented in the Renaissance? Where would we be now? What technologies would we have? It's an alternate history we'll never know, because the key to that future burned in warehouses in Alexandria while Julius Caesar pursued his political ambitions. But that's not the darkest part of this story. The darkest part is what happened to the people who tried to preserve what was left. Hypatia of Alexandria was a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher in the late 4th century AD. She taught at the remains of the Library of Alexandria, or what was left of it after the earlier fires. She made advances in geometry. She improved the design of the astrolabe. She wrote commentaries on mathematical texts that are now lost, though we know about them through references in other works. And in 415 AD, she was murdered by a Christian mob. They dragged her from her chariot, stripped her naked, scraped her flesh from her bones with broken pottery, and burned her remains. Because she represented pagan learning. Because she taught philosophy that contradicted religious doctrine. Because knowledge itself had become dangerous. After Hypatia's death, Alexandria ceased to be a center of learning. Scholars fled. The few remaining texts were hidden, scattered, or destroyed. The institutional knowledge that had survived the fires was finally extinguished by religious zealotry. And this pattern repeated across the ancient world. In 529 AD, the Christian Emperor Justinian closed the academy in Athens, the school founded by Plato 900 years earlier. Pagan learning was forbidden. Philosophical inquiry was dangerous. Libraries that had somehow survived were purged of anything that contradicted scripture. The Dark Ages weren't just a collapse of Roman political power. They were a deliberate suppression of knowledge. They were, in many ways, a successful effort to make people forget. And it worked. For 1,000 years, Europe forgot how to build with concrete. Forgot the earth revolves around the sun. Forgot that disease has natural causes. Forgot that the human body can be studied and understood. The knowledge existed in the Islamic world, preserved by scholars who valued learning. But in Europe, amnesia was enforced by the sword and the stake. Read the wrong book, ask the wrong question, and you burn just like the libraries did. They wanted you to forget. And for 1,000 years, you did. Here's what's even more disturbing. Some of the knowledge wasn't lost accidentally. It was destroyed deliberately, systematically, by people who understood exactly what they were doing. When the Spanish conquered the Americas, they found civilizations with sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The Maya had calculated the solar year to an accuracy of 365.2420 days. Modern science puts it at 365.2422 days. They were off by 17 seconds. Without telescopes. Without computers. Using nothing but careful observation passed down through generations. And they'd recorded it all in books, in codices made from bark paper covered in glyphs. In 1562, a Spanish bishop named Diego de Landa ordered all Maya books to be burned. He wrote that they contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil. Thousands of codices burned. Centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash in a matter of days. Only 4 Maya codices survived. Out of thousands. Everything else we know about Maya civilization comes from archaeology, from the ruins they left behind, from fragments and hints and shadows. Their medical knowledge, gone. Their agricultural techniques, gone. Their understanding of astronomy that let them predict eclipses centuries in advance, mostly gone. Because one bishop decided their knowledge was incompatible with his religion. This wasn't ignorance. This was calculated destruction. Nalanda could read some of the glyphs. He understood these were sophisticated texts. He knew what he was burning. And he did it anyway, because preserving his worldview was more important than preserving human knowledge. Let that sink in. How many technologies, how many medical treatments, the smoke of those fires has long since cleared, and with it went knowledge that can never be recovered. Now, think about what else they erased. What else was deliberately destroyed because it contradicted someone's narrative? What technologies existed that we don't even have hints of because every trace of them was eliminated? There's a technology the Romans had that we're still trying to understand. Flexible glass. Multiple ancient sources mention it. Pliny the Elder writes about a craftsman who created a bowl made of flexible glass and presented it to the Emperor Tiberius. To demonstrate its properties, he threw it on the ground. The bowl dented but didn't shatter. He then repaired the dent with a small hammer. Tiberius asked if anyone else knew the secret of making this glass. The craftsman said no. So Tiberius had him executed. Because flexible, unbreakable glass would destroy the value of gold and silver, since glassware would last forever. It was an economic threat. So the technology was eliminated along with its inventor. Now, you might think this is just a legend. An ancient Roman tall tale. Except the story appears in multiple independent sources. Petronius mentions it. Dio Cassius mentions it. These aren't myths. These are historical accounts from different authors writing at different times. Something happened. Some technology existed briefly and then vanished. And the most likely explanation is that it was deliberately suppressed because its existence threatened powerful economic interests. Modern materials science has tried to recreate flexible glass. We have some candidates. Aluminum oxynitride, sometimes called transparent aluminum, is extremely strong and has some flexibility. But it requires industrial manufacturing processes. Could the Romans have stumbled on something similar using techniques we've lost? Maybe. Or maybe flexible glass is still out there, waiting to be rediscovered, with the formula written in a manuscript that burned in Alexandria or Baghdad or Nalanda. You were taught half the story. The half they wanted you to know. The half that says humanity climbed steadily from ignorance to enlightenment, with occasional setbacks but always moving forward. That's not what happened. What happened is we knew things, built things, understood things, and then we forgot. Not once. Not twice. Multiple times across history. And each time, we had to start over, fumbling in the dark, trying to remember what our ancestors knew. Here's a technology we lost and only recently rediscovered. Damascus steel. Swords made in Damascus between 1100 and 1700 AD had a distinctive wavy pattern and were incredibly strong and sharp. They could cut through European swords, through chain mail, through a silk scarf dropped onto the blade. The steel had properties that modern metallurgy couldn't explain. Then, around 1700, the technique for making Damascus steel was lost. No one knows exactly why. Maybe the ore sources ran out. Maybe the last master smith died without passing on the full technique. Maybe the information was written down somewhere and that somewhere burned. But the knowledge vanished. For 300 years, metallurgists tried to recreate Damascus steel. They failed. They could make steel that looked similar, but it didn't have the same properties. It wasn't until 2006 that researchers figured it out. The secret was carbon nanotubes. Microscopic tubes of carbon embedded in the steel matrix, giving it incredible strength and flexibility. The Damascus smiths didn't know about nanotubes. They didn't understand the chemistry of what they were doing. But they knew that if you used ore from a specific region, and you forged it in a specific way, and you added certain organic. Modern medicine didn't develop reliable contraceptives until the 20th century. which means we lost 2,000 years of reproductive freedom because a plant went extinct and the knowledge of what that plant was vanished with it. How many unwanted pregnancies? How many deaths in childbirth? How much human suffering could have been prevented if we'd preserved the knowledge of Silphium? They wanted you to forget. Or maybe we just value the wrong things, and knowledge preservation has never been a priority until it's too late. Let me tell you the most unsettling thing about all of this. We're still doing it. Right now. Today. Knowledge is still being lost. In 2003, the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad was looted. Thousands of artifacts stolen or destroyed, including clay tablets with cuneiform writing. Some of those tablets had never been translated. We'll never know what information they contained. Digital archives are vulnerable in ways physical libraries never were. A power outage, a server failure, a cyber attack, and entire databases can vanish instantly. We've put so much faith in digital preservation, but digital is fragile. Formats become obsolete. Files corrupt. Companies go bankrupt and take their data with them. Ask yourself, what are we losing right now? What knowledge exists today that won't exist in 100 years because nobody thought to preserve it properly? The Library of Alexandria held the collected knowledge of the ancient world. We have Wikipedia and Google. But if the internet collapsed tomorrow, how much of that knowledge would survive? How much is backed up physically? How much exists only in digital form, vulnerable to the same catastrophes that destroyed the ancient libraries? We think we're smarter now. We think we've learned from history. But have we? Or are we just repeating the same patterns with different tools? You were taught half the story. The comfortable half. The half that says we're at the peak of human knowledge and everything before was primitive. But the truth is more disturbing. The truth is we've lost more than we've kept. The technologies I've described are just the ones we know about. The ones we have evidence for. How many others existed that we don't even have hints of? How many innovations vanished so completely that we don't realize they ever existed? Here's what you need to understand. The ancients weren't stupid. They were us, with the same brains, the same capacity for observation and reasoning and innovation. They had 2,000 years of accumulated knowledge that we didn't have access to because it burned. And in some areas, in some technologies, they surpassed what we can do today. Their concrete lasts longer. Their steel was stronger. Their astronomical calculations were more accurate than anything achieved in Europe until the 16th century. They had batteries. They had steam engines. They had mechanical computers. And we forgot all of it. We had to rediscover it from scratch, centuries or millennia later. This isn't ancient history. This is a warning. This is what happens when knowledge is concentrated and then destroyed. When political power trumps intellectual preservation. When religious dogma overrides scientific inquiry. When economic interests eliminate technological threats. The pattern repeats. Rome falls and we lose concrete. Baghdad falls and we lose advanced mathematics. Constantinople falls and we lose Greek fire. The Maya are conquered and we lose centuries of astronomical observation. Now you see beyond the official story. Now you ask better questions. Like what else burned that we haven't realized is missing yet? Like whether we're preserving our own knowledge well enough, or if we're setting up the next great forgetting. Like what your grandchildren won't have access to because we failed to protect it today. The truth survives. Boys. Even when they try to bury it for centuries. It survives in artifacts pulled from shipwrecks. In ruins that refuse to crumble. In techniques passed down orally when the written word was too dangerous. In the patient work of archaeologists and historians piecing together fragments, trying to remember what humanity once knew. The libraries burned. But the knowledge finds a way. It always has. Sometimes it takes 2,000 years. But it finds a way. So ask yourself, what else are they not teaching? What else waits to be remembered? And when you find those empty pedestals in the museum, those gaps in the timeline, those technologies that appeared and vanished without explanation, remember, they didn't vanish because they didn't work. They vanished because the knowledge of how to make them burned. In Alexandria. In Baghdad. In Nalanda. In fires we've forgotten about. In libraries whose names we'll never know. The silence is the loudest part. Listen to it and wonder what's missing.